Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing how I made this cute Christmas card featuring lots of adorable Lawn Fawn critters, but for this one I used Lawn Fawn critters that are not necessarily traditional Christmas critters. Actually, these are part of a stamp set that was released back in the summer. So I thought it would be fun to repurpose these critters for Christmas. So without further ado, let's get into the card making. I'm starting by building the background, and for this I wanted a stamped and colored background with markers, which is definitely a departure from what I normally do. So I'm using this Over the Mountain Borders stamp set from Lawn Fawn, which includes a bunch of different sort of mountainy scenic border dies that you can use to build a background. So the first one here is sort of a hilly mountain image, and you can see that it has that sort of curved line at the bottom, which makes it look like a hillside. So I'm just lining that up using my Misty stamping tool onto a piece of white cardstock, which I've cut to be just slightly smaller than a standard size A2 card. So I believe that this white panel is 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. So I'm stamping this mountain border out in black ink, and this ink is Copic friendly. So I'm using Gina K Amalgam ink, which is a nice Copic friendly black ink. And I'm stamping it out a couple times with my Misty tool just to make sure I get a really nice crisp black image. When that's done, I'll clean off that stamp and pull it off, and I'm going to move down onto the next hillside stamp, and I'm going to move down the panel one by one with these sort of hillside border images until I get to the bottom, and I'll have a total of 3 of these hillsides that make up the whole panel. So for my second one, I'm using this hillside that kind of slopes from the top on the right down to the bottom on the left and has a few little trees within it, which I thought was really cute. And I'm just doing the same thing here where I've put my paper in my Misty tool and stuck it down with those magnet bars. And then I'm just lining up where I want that border, pulling it up with the flap of the Misty, inking it up with my black ink, and then pressing it down onto the panel so that I get a nice impression. And I'm doing that twice so that I get a really nice crisp black impression. But really with this type of stamping tool, you can do it as many times as you want. So you can stamp out 2-3 times, as many times as it takes to get a good impression. Okay, so I've made my way down to the bottom of my panel here, and now I'm taking that other hillside die, or stamp. So this is the one that starts kind of on the top left and slopes down towards the right, and it also has some nice trees in it. So I'm just stamping that out towards the bottom of the panel, and that will finish off all of my 3 hillside border images that make up the background of this card. Now, I mentioned before that this is not typical for me to do, and that's because if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll probably know that my typical method for making a background is to use some Distress Oxide inks and blend some sort of background, usually a sky, and then I probably layer some pieces of cardstock over top to make it look like grass or ground. So that's how I typically go, and I really wanted to just try something different for this card, which is why I went with this stamping and coloring technique for the background, and I actually think that it turned out really well, and I'm glad that I tried something new. So I definitely encourage you to try this if you haven't tried it lately. Okay, so I'm going ahead and starting to fill in the background with color, and I'm starting with these trees. And generally my technique for this type of thing is to just take all the images that are going to be the same color and just color them in with each marker one marker at a time, I should say, and color in all the images that require that color at once. So as you can see, I started with the lightest green, which was G02 Copic marker. Then I came in with a very dark green, I think I used G28, and added some dark shadows, and then I blended them together using the middle color, which for me was G07. And I did that for all the trees at once. I then came in with a brown Copic marker and colored in those little tree trunks, and now I can color in these mountains, and I decided I wanted them to be snow-peaked mountains, so I'm coloring in the main bodies of the mountains with gray to look like gray rock, and then I will kind of just add a little bit of shadow detail to the top so that they mostly stay white to look like snow, but have a little bit of shadow detail. So for the mountain bodies themselves, I started with the darkest gray towards one side to make it look like that's sort of where the shadow is on all of the mountains. And then I just blended them out shade by shade, just going from darker to lighter shades one at a time until I filled in the whole mountain image. And this way it kind of looks like the light is shining on the mountains from the left, because that's where the lightest color is, and the shadows are towards the right. Like I mentioned, I then just added a little bit of light gray to those snow caps to make them look like snow. I then added a little bit of light blue marker to each of the hills just to kind of make it look like the light is reflecting off the snow and creating that sort of nice light blue shade, but that was all I did, and I kept them very simple otherwise. That's because I'm going to be adding a lot of images on top, so I knew I didn't want a lot of detail in that snow. Okay, for this sky, I'm just filling it in with Copic markers, and I sort of followed along the mountain line with a light yellow marker to make it look like there's a bit of light emanating from behind the mountains, kind of like the sun is just starting to rise or something. From there, I started up the panel with started with a very light shade of blue-green Copic marker and just used darker and darker shades until I got to the top. And I'm going back and forth between the shades to blend them in. So I started at the bottom with a light yellow, like I said, and then the next one up was, I think, BG000, and then BG10, and then at the top, I believe it was BG13. Once I had done that and I felt like I had sufficiently blended those blue-greens together, I came in with my 0 Copic marker and added a bunch of dots. And what the 0 marker does is basically add blank alcohol. It's basically blank alcohol with no color in it. So it sort of pushes away the color from underneath where you're placing it. So by making all those little dots, it sort of pushed away the blue color beneath them and created these colorless little dots, which I thought looked a lot like sort of snow in the sky. I also came in with a white gel pen to add a few extra accents, such as even more dots in the sky to look like snow, as well as little dots and lines on some of the images. And finally, I came in with an iridescent, shimmery gel pen to add even more dots in the sky, again, just to kind of add a little bit of sparkle and shine and make it look like sparkly, shiny snow. So that's how the final panel looks once it's all colored in, and as I turn it in the light, you can sort of see those iridescent dots that I added to the sky, and I just love sort of the look of that colored background. I think it's really sort of simple and sweet. Okay, so now it's time to start building the rest of the card, and to start, I am stamping out the sentiment. I knew I wanted the sentiment to be embossed in white embossing onto black cardstock. So I took a piece of small black scrap cardstock and I wiped it down with an anti-static tool. And now I'm stamping out the sentiment in Versamark ink, which is a clear stamping ink for embossing because it's sticky. So I stamped out part of each of the sentiments on a different side of that so that I knew I was going to just trim them down into little strips. So I just stamped out part of the sentiment onto each end so I could trim it down easily. And then I poured some white embossing powder over them. Heat embossed them off camera and cut them down into those little strips. So overall it'll say, "Have a Wild Christmas." And I took those actually from 2 different stamp sets. Have a Wild comes from the Toucan Do It stamp set, which is where a lot of these images come from. And then the word Christmas actually came from a different stamp set by Lawn Fawn. But the good thing about these stamp sets is that they are quite interchangeable often when it comes to their sentiments, because there are a lot of their stamp sets by Lawn Fawn that use the same font. So I was lucky enough to find another stamp set that had the word Christmas in that same font. So I was able to combine them to create the sentiment, "Have a Wild Christmas." Okay, so as you can see, I've gone ahead and stamped, colored, and cut out a bunch of these images. Most of them, like I mentioned, are from the Toucan Do It stamp set, which is a summer-themed stamp set by Lawn Fawn that featured all of these cute little summery critters like the toucans and that leopard, and the little lizard and some of the butterflies. But I also included some images that are more related to Christmas, like that string of lights, the little reindeer hat, the candy cane, the presents, and the Santa hat. So I had actually stamped, colored, and cut out all of these images ahead of time. I had pre-stamped, colored, and cut out the summer images much earlier in the year, actually during summer, and had them sort of ready to go on a card and hadn't used them yet, so that's why I pulled them out for this. And the same thing with a bunch of the Christmas images. I actually pre-stamped, colored, and cut a whole bunch of those in preparation for my holiday card making, so I had all of those images ready to go for this card. I cut out a piece of that red stripy cardstock, which comes from a Lawn Fawn paper pack, and glued it down onto a white A2 size card base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And then I glued my background panel right onto that, which left that really nice stripy red border that I think looks like candy canes, which is really fun. I then glued together a bunch of these images. So I glued the little reindeer hat onto that toucan, and I glued the Santa hat onto the leopard, and I glued one of the candy canes into the mouth of the other toucan, and then I'm able to sort of start building my scene. And what you can see that I've done here is I've actually laid out all of the critters onto the card front without adhesive, and then when it's time to actually stick them down, I just moved them all off to the side, but kind of put them in pretty much the same position that I knew I wanted them to be in on the card, so that all I had to do was pull up each one, add some adhesive to the back, and then stick it down where I kind of knew it had to go. For most of these images, I'm using some foam squares to stick them down just to add a little bit of extra dimension, but for some of them I do just stick them straight down to the panel with glue. And in general, if you watched a lot of my videos, you know I I do like to combine those techniques. I like to pop some critters up and glue some critters down, and I think that just adds sort of a nice interest to your card with different layers of dimension. So that's definitely a good tip. If you're making cards like this that have a lot of different sort of elements and critters, try popping some up and gluing some down and see what you think. Okay, so for this little lizard, I'm gluing it down, and then I'm taking some of the other elements and sort of gluing them down around the scene as well. Another tip for making these sort of critter scene cards is to kind of arrange your main images where you want them first. So if you've noticed, I put my leopard and the two toucans down first because those are the biggest images and I wanted them to be kind of spaced in a way that was visually appealing. And once that was done, I could then arrange all of those other little images around the scene to kind of fill it in. And of course, what I often forget to do, but what I will remind you to do, is to always remember to leave space for your sentiment. So I sometimes forget to do that, and then I have to think about where to put it in after. But if you can think about it in advance, it's always a good thing. So for me, I'm just sticking that sentiment up in the top left corner, and I put it on an angle just to kind of add a little bit of interest. So again, it'll just say "Have a Wild Christmas," and I embossed that onto some black cardstock and cut it down into little strips. I really didn't want the focus of this card to be on the sentiment because there's so much else going on, and I really wanted the focus to be on all those cute critters in the scene that was built. So yeah, I think that this card is really cute, and I'm really happy that I was able to use these stamped images that I had sort of sitting in my stash from this summer on a Christmas card, and it's non-traditional and kind of unexpected, which I like. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did like it, please feel free to check out the other videos on my channel. I do post every week, one card per week here at YouTube, but I post actually much more often than that over at Instagram. So if you do want to see more of my cards, head over there as well. All of the information for that is down in the video description below, as well as links to all of the supplies that I used in this video if you would like to make a card like this yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!